Welcome back to Discourse number 2, You Create Your Reality, the Manifestation of Thought. This is session number 14. Theoretical nuclear physicist Amit Goswami is an academic who has embraced the spiritual concept of Eastern philosophical thought that consciousness is primary to reality and not matter. In one of his many books on this subject, Quantum Creativity, he states, "Consciousness is the foundation of all being, including matter. When choosing from material possibilities, consciousness is choosing from itself, and therefore doesn't require a signal." This statement by Goswami that consciousness is choosing from the non-local realm of possibilities or probabilities aligns with Spira's commentary that finite minds are downloads from the one infinite mind of pure consciousness. Sheldrake's morphogenetic fields are the archetypes storing the memory of the avatar as an ego-body-mind consciousness program that is to be created in physical experience as a human entity. Earlier in this discourse, information was provided as to the role of the observer that was required in order to collapse a potential from the quantum non-local field into actuality as a particle or bit of information that is localized in time and space. The question was asked, so what is the observer or participator collapsing the wave of potentials into expressions as particles? The answer provided was consciousness, because there is only one substance that pervades all. Goswami also addresses this same question in his book Quantum Creativity. Who creates? The presence of consciousness in itself does not cause potentiality to actualize. Collapse occurs when an observer with a brain is present as well, with the intention to look. Non-local consciousness that chooses always remains in potentiality, but the effect of the choice occurs in the manifest domain of actuality. The brain of the observer is now introduced as an important aspect of creating the nature of your reality. This is the mechanism that becomes the architect, that takes the blueprint of the program residing in the archetype and constructs the perceivable world of matter that can be sensory experienced. Goswami continues this analogy. What comes first, the subject of awareness, that is having the experience, or the objects of experience, that which is experienced? The answer is neither. The subject and the object of the awareness are co-created by downward causation, choice, through the operation of quantum measurement in the brain. The crucial point here is to realize that the brain is very special. In the presence of the observer's brain, possibilities collapse, although we never see the brain at work. Instead, we identify with it. Again, you are reminded that you, that have been identified with as a personality with an independent reality, is an illusion. You are part of the perception that is being created as an avatar in the game. You are nothing perceivable or conceivable, as Nisargadatta Maharaj declared. Goswami continues further in his book to affirm this. In the brain, perception requires memory, and memory requires perception. What happens when consciousness collapses the macroscopically distinguishable quantum possibility states of this tangled hierarchical states of the brain? Self-identity. Consciousness identifies with the observer's brain, which thusly develops the capacity to refer to itself as separate from its environment. This solution of the quantum measurement paradox also solves the paradox of perception, how you come into the theatre of perception at all. When your brain identifies something outside yourself, it makes an image, no doubt. But who is looking at the image? A mini you, a homunculus sitting at the back of the brain? If so, then who is looking at the homunculus? The puzzle is solved by a tangled hierarchy. For the brain, the observer becomes the observed. Consciousness identifies with the brain, leaving the impression that there is just you looking at an object separate from you. Herein lies the greatest act of self-creation. from your highest mind containing your true essence of genius, unlimited knowledge and remembrance of your internal connection as one with the all that is, collapses into a limited, conditional, finite mind that is only known as self. A personality that lives in a state of forgetfulness as to its true identity, hidden in a self-created world of other bodies and objects. Now you can understand why the ego's job is to keep you mindless and out of your mind, distracted in a world of bodies and objects. To know thyself would be the discovery that all you have ever been seeking was hidden in your own mind. The great architect, the brain. It is the brain of the human entity that carries the template or blueprint of the archetype into physical form. What is an idea in the archetypical mind is mapped on the human brain as a web of neuronets, a hierarchical connectome that freezes the electrical impulses of thought into a pattern of firing neurons. This pattern of firing establishes a map or schemata of meaning. The brain does not create thought, it is the receiver of thought impulses, just as Sheldrake suggests in his analogy of the TV set receiving a signal. This concept that the brain is the receiver of thought transmissions as light impulses may be challenging to understand, as it is in complete contrast to Western scientific declarations. Quantum physics is only a very new realm of research beginning in the early 20th century, which delved into the subatomic world looking for the solid atom that reality depended upon. To this day, that solid God particle has never been found, despite billions of dollars being spent on the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland. The Western scientific paradigm that matter is the foundation of reality may well be on its way out. Hence, many scientists and researchers, such as Sheldrake, are declaring hypotheses that are more in alignment with what the Eastern spiritual mystics and gurus have known for centuries. There is only one substance, and consciousness is paramount to understanding the nature of reality. To fully understand how the brain, as the architect, reconstructs the blueprint of the archetype to express as a human personality, then all of the knowledge of quantum physics mentioned to date is required. The neuronets of the brain are coupled with the quantum field and resonating with the vibrational signal and frequency that the archetype expresses. Every aspect of your personal reality can be understood when founded on this knowledge of frequency and vibrations. Nikola Tesla, who certainly used this understanding of frequency and vibrations in his acclaimed work, stated, "My brain is only a receiver. In the universe there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, inspiration. I have not penetrated into the secrets of this core, but I know that it exists." It is significant in this quote of Tesla's that he not only used the word knowledge, which has been frequently referred to as gnosis, but also the word inspiration. The definition of the word inspiration is immediate influence of God or a God. Inspiration derives from inspire, which arises from spirit. Hence, to be inspired is to be in spirit. Tesla is the perfect example of the state of genius when inspired by ideas that are received from the Akasha. An essential attribute of genius is the ability to remain in solitude and deep contemplation, free of the interference from social noise and activities that clutter the mind with triviality and distraction. Perhaps this is the reason savants and children or adults with autism, who often also have heightened creativity, are not socially compliant and prefer solitude. Hence, meditation is an essential practice of the Eastern philosophical gurus and teachers, as it mimics the stillness and silence of the void, or the mind of all that is. Ego thought is subdued and silenced to allow connection with the greater mind. Another genius, Sir John Eccles, who was an Australian neurophysiologist whose research into brain neurology and synaptic connections led the way in furthering scientific understanding into brain functioning. In 1958, his exemplary work was recognised with a knighthood, and in 1963 a Nobel Prize. It was during Eccles' tenure as Professor of Physiology at the University of Otago in New Zealand from 1944 to 1951 that he met and commenced a lifelong friendship with Karl Popper, who was a lecturer in philosophy at the University of New Zealand in Christchurch. Popper is considered to be one of the 20th century's greatest philosophers and also received the knighthood in 1965 and awarded a Fellow of Royal Society in 1976. This synchronistic meeting changed the course of Eccles' research as it moved beyond a purely materialistic understanding of the brain-creating mind to encompass a philosophical approach to the brain-mind problem, as he referred to his research. Eccles became not only a neurophysiologist, but a philosopher and author of note, including his book Facing Reality, which encompassed his friend Karl Popper's philosophical approaches to existence and the experience of reality. Eccles and Popper later collaborated their ideas in the book The Self and Its Brain, published in 1977. Eccles coined the term psychon to describe a unit of mental activity. In the Oxford Dictionary, psychon is defined as a hypothetical unit of thought, mental activity, or nervous energy. The term psychon was used to embrace the philosophical concept that there was a spiritual self or soul that must be included when determining the brain-mind function. In his book, How the Self Controls Its Brain, he writes, "Since materialist solutions fail to account for our experienced uniqueness, I am constrained to attribute the uniqueness of the self or soul to a supernatural spiritual creation. It is the certainty of the inner core of unique individuality that necessitates the divine creation. I submit that no other explanation is tenable, neither genetic uniqueness with its fantastically impossible lottery, nor environment differentiations which do not determine one's uniqueness but merely modify it. This conclusion is of inestimable theological significance. It strongly reinforces our belief in the human soul and its miraculous origin in divine creation. There is recognition not only of the transcendent God, the creator of the cosmos, the God in which Einstein believed, but also of the inanimate God to whom we owe our being." Eccles' studies were embedded in the understanding as to how or what stimulated or excited the dendrite of a neuron to fire, as it was this conglomeration of neurons firing that the basis for our fundamental experience of self is instigated. It was his introduction of philosophical thought into his research that ultimately provided the answer. It was the mind, or consciousness, that enhanced the firing of neurons in the brain to experience self. In a further passage taken from the book How the Self Controls Its Brain, the self with the little s refers to the ego, and the self, the capital S, the psyche or soul. Human self-consciousness depends on the miraculous coming to be of the self that achieves expression by enhancing the low exocytotic probability of the billions of butons of the human neocortex. Our hypothesis thus gives the ultimate how of the human neocortex, and so redeems what would otherwise be a mindless world peopled by unconscious beings. In 1976, Eccles gave a presentation to the convention of the Parapsychology Association in the city of Utrecht in Netherlands. This presentation by Eccles is summarized in David R. Hawkins' book, Power versus Force. The brain acts as a receiving set for energy patterns residing in the mind itself, which exist as consciousness expressed in the form of thought. It was in 1983 that experiments of Benjamin Libet, mentioned in the Discourse, The Ego Personality, would confirm Eccles' research, which was also later reproduced by John Dillon Hines. This crucial understanding that the brain is the receiver of thought and not the creator of thought, as Eccles' research confirms, is contained within numerous spiritual texts, as it is primary to all spiritual wisdom and knowledge. It is only Western materialistic paradigms that are deficient in understanding the truth that Eastern philosophical traditions declare, which leads to confusion and false assumptions about the nature of reality that you have been led to believe. Professor Hilton Hotima was a researcher and author who studied ancient texts and teachings and wrote a notable book called The Great Law. He makes reference to this concept as to the reception of thought. There is no such thing as original thought. No man has produced an original thought, for man cannot produce an original thought. In fact, man cannot produce thought at all. Man does not originate his thoughts and ideas. The first thought expressed by him came to him from without. It came not from himself. It was not of his own making. It was suggested to him by something that had either an actual or a potential existence. It was received by him as an impression upon his brain cells. The impressions were translated into what we call thought. They were transformed by the brain to correspond to that from which the impression was received. Another reference that provides weight to this assertion on the thought being received is contained within the book Stalking the Wild Pendulum on the Mechanics of Consciousness, written by Israeli-American scientist and inventor Itzhak Bentov, who was also a researcher of consciousness. He writes, "I suggest therefore that our brain is not the source of thought, but a thought amplified. As we have seen, it takes a tiny impulse, magnifies it for us, and only then does it become a thought. It appears that the thought does not originate within the brain. Rather, the brain picks up the tiny impulses implanted there by our astral, mental, or causal bodies. These couple very weakly with the physical brain, and therefore at first can produce only a very weak signal in the brain. It is the function of the brain to amplify this signal for us into a useful form." Spiritual teacher Deepak Chopra, who is also a medical doctor, wrote an article, "Why You and the Universe Are One," which also refers to Eccles and his research. In the summary of his article, he includes this assertion that the brain is a receiver of thought. The brain isn't the seat of consciousness, but acts more like a radio receiver and perhaps emitter, translating conscious activity into physical correlates. The radio receiver metaphor describes the feedback loop between mind and brain, which are actually not separate but part of the same complementary activity in consciousness. Finally, we turn to A Course in Miracles. The function of thought comes from God and is in God. As part of his thought, you cannot think apart from him. Thoughts can represent the lower or bodily level of experience or the higher or spiritual level of experience. One makes the physical and the other creates the spiritual. You are responsible for what you think because it is only at this level that you can exercise choice. Thoughts are not big or little, powerful or weak. They are merely true or false. The following image can now be used to symbolize what has been stated here as the manifestation of thought into reality. From the Akasha as the server holding all thought, to the receiver of the transmission as the brain, and finally the projection as an experienced physical reality of perceptions that the human entity sensory experiences. The quote reference from A Course in Miracles stating, "Thoughts are not big or little, powerful or weak, they are merely true or false," is extremely relevant as it reveals the logic gates mentioned earlier. Logic gates operate conditionally, as they are based on Boolean algebra, which mathematically measures the values of yes or no answers as a binary code of ones and zeros. The yes and no answers of Boolean algebra are also referred to as truth values, with true assigned the value of 1 and false assigned the value of 0. The brain then becomes a circuit board of neural nets that have a mathematical construct to filter the transmission of light impulses or ideas into a linear pattern expressing as true or false responses. A stream of unlimited thought from the timeless Christ consciousness mind is transduced or filtered into logic gates that are in time and space. This is the linear thoughts of the ego body mind consciousness that can only think one thought at a time. A causes B, causes C, causes D. The archetype, in effect, is biasing your perspectives by amplifying what you pay attention to. The brain, through this transducing of thought impulses into linear-based logic gates, has now created an arbitrator or judge. A thought is now polarized as an expression of that judgment. Your inward mental conditions as an experience of your judgments are now projected externally as an illusory objective world and perceived outside of yourself. A Course in Miracles confirms this. All seeing starts with the perceiver, who judges what is true and what is false, and what he judges false he does not see. You who would judge reality cannot see it, for whenever judgment enters, reality has slipped away. The out of mind is out of sight because what is denied is there, but is not recognized. Christ is still there, although you know him not. A significant feature of this linear-based sequential thought process that filters thoughts into a stream of A to B to C to D by judgment of values as true or false is whatever value you choose, the experience of the other becomes unavailable. Choose true or yes, then false or no becomes unexperienced. This is what the above quote of A Course in Miracles is proclaiming. And what he judges false, he does not see. This is how the ego body mind consciousness of a human entity is limited to a personal reality of this or that, in place of this and that. The primary reality that is one is now experienced as opposites and degrees of truth, never the whole. In quantum physics, this effect is known as the complementary principle, as theorized by Danish physicist Niels Bohr. Bohr was awarded a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1922 in recognition of his invaluable research in the field of quantum physics. In essence, the complementary principle states that knowledge exists only as complementary properties. When knowledge is known in one aspect, then knowledge of the other is excluded. This statement is most obvious in the wave-particle duality feature of the non-local quantum field mentioned earlier, where measurement of both position and velocity of a quantum object simultaneously is impossible. Measurement or observation of one aspect, such as position, excludes knowledge of velocity or momentum. In Bohr's paper Quantum Physics and Philosophy, Causality and Complementary, published in 1958, he states, "In quantum mechanics, however, evidence about atomic objects obtained by different experimental arrangement exhibits a novel kind of complementary relationship. Indeed, it must be recognized that such evidence, which appears contradictory when combination into a single picture is attempted, exhaust all conceivable knowledge about the object." Bohr's principle of complementary is in alignment with the Eastern philosophical teachings in regards to the yin and yang of opposites and the paradoxes evident in the nature of reality, especially in the teachings of the Tao. The Tao uses koans as paradoxical questions to enable the student to glimpse a truth behind the paradox. What is and what is not create each other. Hence, the ego body mind consciousness can only experience a relative reality because it is created from judgment. The whole truth can never be known by the human entity in the ego body-mind consciousness that is dividing reality into complementary aspects. Only the Christ consciousness mind that is absolute and whole has access to truth. Again, the earlier quote from A Course in Miracles confirms this. You who would judge reality cannot see it, for whenever judgment enters, reality has slipped away. Archetypes create within you a neuronet of associations that create a specific electromagnetic signature that will attract thoughts that are frequency specific to you. Your polarized thoughts as judgments will attract the likeness of that thought into your personal reality to experience. This becomes the process of resistance and acceptance of the ego body mind consciousness. What you resist is suppressed into the unconscious. What you accept will become true for you. Earlier in this discourse, the hypothesis of Rupert Sheldrake was mentioned when discussing morphogenetic fields. To recall, he stated, memories are transferred by resonance from similar patterns of activity in the past. We tune into ourselves in the past. This statement was then followed by the comment, this field holds the memory of you as your body and also your habits of behavior, which are your personality traits. In effect, it holds your program. This program from the archetype that is creating your fixation of attention is drawing its signal from the morphogenetic field that is a memory of your past behaviors or judgments. It ensures the continuity and repetition of a self-identity that can be considered a habit. What you have chosen in the past, you will ultimately continue to choose again and again. This creates a mathematical correlation that is called regression to the mean, or the average answer will be upheld. Your personal reality becomes nothing more than the repetition of the same way of thinking. The you as a personality are now a limited point of view, experiencing a particular perspective of life. This is your autobiographical story, held in place biochemically. Referring again to spiritual teacher Deepak Chopra in his book, Synchrodestiny, he writes about how the stories we live out as our life become who we think we are, following an archetypical pattern that is likened to destiny. Our stories are derived from relationships, contexts, and meanings triggered through memory, arising from karma and experience. As we live out these stories, we start to realize that they are not original. Although the details of the stories vary from individual to individual, the themes and motives are timeless. Basic archetypes that replay endlessly, heroes and villains, sin and redemption, the divine and the diabolical, forbidden lust and unconditional love. These are the same themes that keep many of us fascinated by the soap operas, gossip columns and tabloids where we see them expressed in slightly exaggerated form. We're fascinated because we can identify some aspect of our souls in these stories. As philosopher Pierre Thiel de Chardin once declared, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. The spiritual essence of our true self that becomes entombed and subjugated within its earthly envelope is the soul that Chopra refers to. Chopra defines the soul in the same book. The soul is the confluence of meanings, contexts, relationships, and mythical stories or archetypical themes that give rise to everyday thoughts, memories, and desires, conditioned by karma, that create the stories in which we participate. In nearly everyone, this participation in the stories of our lives is happening automatically without awareness. We live like actors in a play who are given one line at a time, going through the motions without understanding the full story. But when you get in touch with your soul, you see the whole script for the drama. This is not the first time you, as a spiritual being or soul, has lived an earthly experience as a human entity. Held within your subconscious mind is every role you have ever played. Your soul remembers every life. The experience of déjà vu, whereby you may have a feeling of having previously experienced a present situation, is testament to this truth. Déjà vu defined means already seen. Child prodigies are also symbolic of this statement, as they already possess the knowledge or talent of mastery that has not been learnt in a traditional normal way. So why does the soul reincarnate over and over again? For wisdom. Wisdom defined is knowledge, learning, experience, and arises from the word wise. Wise in turn arises from the root word weed, which is to see, hence to know. Wisdom in esoteric terms is a vibration. When the two become unified and whole, consciousness evolves. It was Plato who coined the term philosophy to mean the love of wisdom, taken from the Greek word sophia, meaning wisdom, and philo, meaning loving. Hence, to philosophically understand knowledge, when combined with experience, is the getting of wisdom. Experience is an essential requirement. Karma is the principle of rhythm in action, whereby a swing to the left must be compensated in equal measure by a corresponding swing to the right. Order is the law of the universe as declared by Thoth earlier. If an archetype is an expression of outer balance, then each life is experienced to regain this balance of the Christ mind. A victim in one life may be a tyrant in the next. Resurrection is only achieved at the place of equilibrium and order, and reincarnation is the act of seeking balance. When the incarnate soul has neutralized its polarity and reconciled the paradox of opposite, then it re-enters the kingdom of heaven in a state of equilibrium as Christ consciousness again. The return of the prodigal son with the wisdom gleaned from the journey beyond. The Son of God is resurrected. Alice Bailey, in her book, The Treatise of White Magic, summarizes this journey of the soul that is imprisoned within the physical form of the human entity. Let it be remembered always that each field of awareness in its boundary constitutes a prison, and that the objective of all work of liberation is to release the consciousness and expand its field of contacts. Where there are boundaries of any kind, where a field of influence is circumscribed, and where the radius of contact is limited, there you have a prison. Ponder on this statement, for it holds much of truth. Where there is an apprehension of a vision of a wide unconquered territory of contacts, then there will inevitably be a sense of imprisonment and of cramping. Where there is realization of worlds to conquer or truths to be learnt, of conquests to be made, of desires to be achieved, of knowledge to be mastered, there you will have a festering sense of limitation, goading on the aspirant to renewed effort and driving the living entity along the path of evolution. Illumination, what does that lead to? Straight to the summit of achievement, to the fulfillment of cyclic destiny, to the emergence of the radiant glory, to wisdom, power, God consciousness. The prison that Bailey alludes to in this statement is the ego's autobiographical story of self that is held in place by habit and repetition exerted by the archetype. As already asserted in the earlier discourse, the ego personality, free will is one of the human entity's illusions. The prison is maintained in place through the aggregate of choices that were earlier referred to as the regression to the mean, or the average answer is upheld analogy. In quantum physics, this concept is known as a probability distribution. Although the material physical world of your objective reality experience appears to produce random events, behind the scenes is the non-local field of quantum physics there isn't. There appears to be a drive or urge hidden in the non-material realm that compels probabilities to express an average or mean answer. When collapsed into the physical world, this is usually visualized as a bell curve, as viewed earlier. This phenomenon has revealed in devices as simple as the throw of a dice and random event generators. In his book, The Cosmic Code, Quantum Physics as the Language of Nature, by Heinz R. Pagels, an American physicist at Rockefeller University, he writes, "Probability distributions of real events, like those of throwing dice, are part of the invisible world. The distributions are invisible not because, like atoms, they are materially small, but because they are not material at all. What is visible is individual material events like the throw of a dice. Probability distributions are like invisible hands that do not touch." Another feature of this phenomenon that Pagels refers to is stability. The continuity of a probability distribution that does not change over time is called an equilibrium distribution and can apply to atomic motions, chemical reactions, or biological and social events. When material events are random and independent, the distribution is stable. It is only when a non-random event is introduced, for example, a rule or a law governing behaviour, is the equilibrium distribution altered. Pagels' comment in regards to this feature of stability concurs with Bailey's reference to the prison that subjugates the soul. What is perceived as freedom by the individual is thus necessity from a collective viewpoint. The die, when it is thrown, may think it has freedom, but whatever it does, it is part of a probability distribution. It is being influenced by the invisible hand. We cannot act without being part of a distribution. It is like being in an invisible prison held by invisible hands. Once again, herein reside Sheldrake's morphogenetic fields that ensure the past habits of a species arise in the present, and Jung's collective unconscious that transcends human history to continually present itself over and over again. Not only is the human entity imprisoned by its story of self-identity, but also social consciousness that repeats the collective archetype throughout history. Groundhog's Day is an attribute of humanity as well as the ego. As Mark Twain once wrote, "By the law of periodical repetition, everything which has happened once must happen again and again and again, and not capriciously, but at regular periods, and each thing in its own period, not another's, and each obeying its own law. The same nature which delights in periodical repetition in the skies is the nature which orders the affairs of the earth." Let us not underrate the value of that hint. This concludes session number 14 of Discourse number 2, You Create Your Reality, the Manifestation of Thought. I look forward to seeing you in session number 15. The link will be in the description box below. Thank you once again for your attendance at this session. So be it.